All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating dynamic that plays out in boardrooms and compliance departments literally all over the world: the investigator versus the leader. We're going to treat this almost like a high stakes financial thriller to bridge the gap between the meticulous how of financial intelligence and the strategic why of executive leadership. I know we constantly hear complaints about regulatory red tape slowing down business, but as you'll see, digging down those deep rabbit holes is exactly what protects an institution's very right to exist. To really get a feel for this, I want you to picture a scenario. Imagine an active military general in a high-ranking government position. His official state salary is, say, $80,000 a year. Pretty standard. But then one morning, out of nowhere, a massive $2 million wire transfer lands in his personal bank account with this super vague label attached: consulting services. I mean, on paper, that is a jaw-dropping influx of cash that completely dwarfs his actual stated income. So, here's the million-dollar question. Well, $2 million question in this case. How can two incredibly intelligent people sitting in the exact same bank look at the exact same transaction and see two completely different realities? Why do smart business leaders sometimes look right past what seems to be a glaringly obvious risk? It really all comes down to perspective, incentives, and the different lenses through which we view success. Notice the stark contrast between these two lenses. From the executive leader's point of view, they might just see a booming corporate client bringing in substantial capital, right? It looks like a massive win, a totally legitimate high-value transaction that's boosting the bank's bottom line. But the financial intelligence investigator, they see something entirely different. They immediately flag this as a massive politically exposed person, or PEP, risk. Because this guy has serious influence over government policy and public funds, the investigator is seeing a flashing red light for potential public corruption and bribery. And this perfectly highlights a major vulnerability that analysts call the intangibility problem. You see, fraudsters absolutely love to abuse invisible services like consultancy or strategic advice. Why? Because, think about it, unlike a massive shipment of tractors or a warehouse full of physical goods, consultancy leaves absolutely zero physical audit trail. It's incredibly easy to just draft up an invoice for strategic advice that honestly never even happened. This makes intangibles the absolute perfect cover story for washing illicit bribe money through the legitimate financial system. Let's map this out chronologically and see how the picture changes when we look at temporal proximity. Investigators don't just follow the money, they watch the clock. So check this out. On October 1st, a major government defensive tender for 50 tanks is announced. On October 15th, boom, that $2 million wire hits the general's account. And then, literally 5 days later, on October 20th, the general's department magically awards that exact defense contract to the company that paid him. When the cash arrives right as a major tender is awarded, yeah, that transforms from a weird anomaly into a highly probable bribe. But hey, the bad guys read the rule books too, right? Advanced launderers have adapted. They know better than to drop a glaring $2 million lump sum that's gonna trigger every single alarm bell in the bank. Instead, they use a retainer model. They try to fly under the radar by sending smaller, structured installments, maybe $50,000 monthly payments. And here's the truly devious part. They intentionally time these payments to hit perfectly on the target's standard official payroll days. By burying the bribe right next to legitimate income, they're creating this false sense of routine, hoping to just totally bypass those basic automated alerts. Okay, so let's actually jump right into the investigator's journey here. This is where we get into the nitty-gritty of open source intelligence and piercing those corporate veils. When you're diving down the investigative rabbit hole and your corrupt target has really tight operational security, meaning they're staying off the grid, the very first thing you look for is conspicuous consumption. This is spending on luxury goods that is wildly out of sync with their official salary. So investigators expand their search outward to family and associates. They run some open source intelligence sweeps, OSINT on social media, and bam, they find the general's son proudly flexing a brand new $250,000 Lamborghini. Suddenly, all that unexplained wealth has a very shiny physical manifestation. Now, obviously, you can't exactly take an Instagram post to court, right? You have to turn that hunch into rock-solid evidence. So the investigator queries the official motor vehicle registry to see whose name is actually on the title of that Lambo. And guess what? The car isn't registered to the general. It isn't registered to his son either. It's registered to a corporate proxy, a shell company named Evergreen Ventures, LLC. The launderers have built themselves a nice little firewall. So now the investigator has to pierce that corporate veil to find the ultimate beneficial owner, or UBO, We need the actual human being pulling the strings. But unmasking them gets super tricky. When the investigator checks the public corporate registry, they just find some generic offshore law firm listed as the director. Classic move. They use nominee directors to maintain total public secrecy and just create an absolute nightmare of legal friction for anyone trying to follow the money. To break through that wall, the investigator has to pivot away from public OSINT data and go straight into the bank's highly confidential internal KYC records. The smoking gun they're hunting for is the internal authorized signatory list, usually part of a corporate board resolution. While the public registry shows some random lawyer in Panama, this internal doc proves to the bank exactly who is actually allowed to move the money. And there it is. The general holds sole signing authority. He's officially exposed as the shadow director, secretly manipulating the whole entity from behind the scenes and completely linking him to the illicit funds and the luxury cars. All right, moving from the investigation back to the boardroom. Let's talk about the strategic resolution and the executive mandates. Now that the puzzle is solved, the investigator packages these findings up into a strict 3-bucket red flag analysis for the Risk Management Committee. First bucket, entity risk. We've got a high-ranking PEP actively using layered corporate shell structures. Second, transaction risk. High-volume cash movements labeled as consulting, but absolutely devoid of any clear economic purpose. And third, geographic risk. The investigators noticed that massive $2 million deposit didn't happen at headquarters. It happened at a remote, out-of-area border branch. That's a huge geographic anomaly intentionally used to evade central scrutiny and prep a rapid exit strategy for the cash. And this puts leadership in a massive, massive dilemma. The risk appetite of the institution has clearly been blown past, so they have to close the account immediately. But, and this is a huge but, under global anti-money laundering laws, revealing an ongoing investigation to a suspect is a severe criminal offense known as tipping off. If a banker actually tells the general, hey, we know about your shell company and the bribes, that banker could literally face jail time for destroying a hidden law enforcement operation. No way around it. So how did they handle it? Investigators and leaders have to cooperate using what's called the commercial approach. Instead of confronting the client with the direct evidence which guarantees that tipping off violation, the bank issues a totally sterile, completely neutral account closure notice. By just citing a baseline contractual, commercial decision or a general shift in risk appetite, the bank executes a neutral exit. It's brilliant because it completely de-risks the bank by dropping the client while perfectly preserving the integrity of law enforcement's hidden trail. Let's pull back from the specific case for a minute, because this really points to a bigger truth about how systems ultimately protect the institution. At the end of the day, human behavior in literally any organization is driven by its environment and its incentives. If a banking environment prioritizes speedy onboarding and hitting high sales volumes over doing that deep forensic link analysis, well, it creates incentives where turning a blind eye gets rewarded. And doing that, it leaves the back door wide open to professional money launderers who are actively out there probing for those exact weaknesses. I absolutely love this quote, and it hits the nail on the head. Systems drive behavior more than slogans do. You can't just slap a compliance poster on the break room wall. You have to build systems that reward doing the really hard work. When your investigators are in the weeds, digging into signatures, public registries, and those complex timelines, they absolutely aren't just creating red tape or slowing down business. They are doing the essential, granular work that actively protects your institution's core license to operate. So, the big takeaway here for you and your leadership team is a pretty profound question to ask yourselves. Is your institution simply prioritizing speed and short-term revenue, or are your underlying systems actually driving the right behavior? Are you empowering your investigators to really dig deep, or are you inadvertently leaving the door unlocked for the next shadow director? Because ultimately, respecting those meticulous investigative rabbit holes is exactly what separates a vulnerable institution from a truly bulletproof one.